You win yet? Shut up. Liam snorted as he refreshed the purple worm venom on his throwing daggers. I finished a whole job and you're still on your losing streak. How is that even possible? Probably because it was an easy job, Raoul said. Olga's starting to beat commanders 10 times her age, you know? Which commanders are those? Liam asked. Some of the frost giants in the Northern Army group, Raoul answered. There were some weird fights, but she still won more than she lost. So where does that leave you? Wherever it leaves me, Raoul shrugged. It's not like I'm bad. Lady Zaradnik says that I'm a match for most of the Imperial Army's commanders. I thought the Imperial Army was supposed to be good. Liam dodged the pine cone Raoul threw at him with a laugh. The thing glanced off the tree trunk behind him and skittered down the rocky slope. How far off are those rangers? Liam asked. It takes them an hour or so to dress a manticore, Raoul answered. So about that far off. In the week or so since Raoul had arrived with his contingent, they had bagged 3 manticores, a dozen pythons, a pack of dire wolves, and scores of carnivorous beasts. Additionally, they had driven the nearby demi-human tribes into the resulting cleared territory and thus further from Beaumont County's borders. According to Raoul, it was enough to minimize incidents over the winter so long as Countess Beaumont's security forces deterred the occasional roaming predator from wandering in. The Sorceress Kingdom was leasing an undead squad to help out with that, so Liam figured there wouldn't be any issues even if there were any incidents. Do you need an escort out of Beaumont County? Raoul asked. Nah, we should be good. Even if the local nobles have crappy security, the 8 Fingers have their thumb on everything. Raoul's expression turned sour upon hearing his reply. Unlike Liam, Raoul had grown up in a village that had to worry more about demi-human raids than bandits and gangs of violent vagrants. People like him tended to have an especially low opinion of lawbreakers, seeing them as traitors to their own kind in a world where there were already plenty of threats to worry about. The men that Countess Beaumont recruited are way more than enough to deal with everyday problems, Liam told him. If they don't turn on her. They won't, Liam said. I can't say that they're loyal to her yet, but they're sold on the idea that she'll improve things for them and their families. Before that, Raoul said, they worked as thugs for the 8 Fingers. What were they sold on then? The same thing, sorta, Liam replied. It's not like most people want to be criminals. Whether your life sucks or not, you try and go with what you think is best. It wasn't hard to figure out. The old Count had let the 8 Fingers overrun his fief and they weren't exactly the nicest bunch. Residents with valuable skills would throw in their lot with criminal organizations not just to improve their own situation, but also to hopefully afford their families and friends some protection through association. Of course, that could also have the effect of dragging more and more people into the criminal underworld, but that was just how things were. With Countess Beaumont now in the picture, the wayward thugs of Beaumont County had a way back into authorities' good graces. The customarily lethal price exacted by the 8 Fingers for betraying their syndicate was not a factor with the idea that the Countess was now prominently involved in one of the Sorceress Kingdom's schemes. And she was, it just wasn't as schemy as people seemed to think it was. What are you doing after we leave? Liam asked. I have to set up patrol routes for the least undead, Raoul answered. The army wants us to survey the Manticore Mountains while we're here, as well. We'll be using our own rangers. Are we allowed to do that? The maps might show that the area's inside Re-Estize's borders, Raoul replied, but it isn't as if they have any control over it. Fiefs like Beaumont County are about as deep into the wilderness as the kingdom gets around here. He supposed it didn't matter much either way. It wasn't as if Re-Estize had the means to expand into the area and they definitely wouldn't notice what was going on. Reed and his men appeared late in the afternoon, bearing bundles of materials from their latest excursion. The long file of rangers bore satisfied expressions as they made the final stretch to the edge of the mining village. Not that Liam could fault them even if the undead did the majority of the work, Their burdens represented a handsome reward for their services so long as Countess Beaumont could find a way to sell them. And that means a trip to the city. So far, the plan relayed to him by Countess Wagner was going as expected. Not that much could go wrong. Rebloom Russia, however, would be infinitely more complicated if what he had heard about the city was true. Another day, another pile of treasure. Reed grinned broadly as he came to a stop in front of Liam. Raoul says that this is the last haul before we head back down. Liam got up from the desiccated branch he had been sitting on and straightened his pants. Yeah, he replied. We have a bunch of things to do in the city. How much security do you think we need to protect our stuff? The woodsman turned thug turned woodsman rubbed his scruffy beard in thought. Never been to the city, the man replied a few moments later. Olin have a better answer, but he's bound to mix his business up with ours if we lean on him. The Countess was living there just last season, but I doubt she has an eye for the kind of trouble we're talking about. Can I just assume it'll be like Facet Town, but 10 times worse? His hometown hadn't been in anywhere near as bad of a situation as places like Beaumont and Middle Harbour, so he wasn't sure if he could rely on an estimate like that. There was little to no sign of official security forces outside of their assigned posts, and even that wasn't a guarantee. As far as he could tell, the countryside was ruled by the Eight Fingers in a fashion that they believed would be most profitable for their syndicate. Would the regional capital be more of the same? I guess we can talk about it over dinner, Liam said. Have your men bring their haul to the usual place. You coming, Raoul? Nah, I need to finish the rest of my assignment. See you whenever. He waved a lazy farewell to Raoul before falling into step beside Reed. The wiry woodsman glanced over his shoulder at the commander's departing figure. I swear that guy talked more to the undead than he did with us, Reed said. They are his subordinates, Liam shrugged. He's here to work, not to chat. I suppose that's fine, too, Reed said. Saw Olin try to get his hooks into the kid more than once. Liam had watched silently while that happened, wondering when Olin would end up as a zombie. Fortunately for the Eight Fingers executive, he had given up on his attempts to sway Raoul before it came to that. I know you said you've never been to the city, Liam said, but how much clout would you say Olin has there? More than here for sure, Reed replied. You've seen it yourself. The more strongly connected a place is to the higher-ups, the more resources and influence a big boss like Olin has access to. That much made sense. Aside from taking punitive actions against defiant nobles who resisted their illicit operations, the bulk of the Eight Fingers' leadership and their direct subordinates had little reason to leave the urban areas of Riestais. By controlling the towns and cities of the kingdom, they effectively controlled its manufacturing and trade. The wealth that they gained from their activities was a pittance compared to the vast quantities of food and raw resources that Riestais' rural regions produced, but what the Eight Fingers stole was the excess production that was supposed to go towards the development of the kingdom. As a result, every place that fell under the nefarious syndicate's influence was condemned to a state of lawlessness and decay. Liam and his sister had grown up in that hell. More importantly, they now knew how things were supposed to be. The problem was that people like Olin didn't see things the same way. The man had only seen success from doing things his way, so Liam wouldn't be surprised if every 2 or 3 moves that Olin made would, intentionally or unintentionally, hamper Countess Beaumont's progress somehow. How am I supposed to work with a guy like that? The Sorceress Kingdom wasn't interested in weakening any of its collaborators in Riestais, so Liam couldn't just kill the guy. Loosening the Eight Fingers' stranglehold on Riestais in any significant way that didn't directly benefit the Sorceress Kingdom was also out of the question. It seemed that all he could do was hope that Countess Beaumont conducted her business in the city quickly and efficiently before returning to her fief where she could stay isolated from what was going on elsewhere. Early that same night, they reached the Countess' base camp, which had in turn returned from her inspection of the nearby mining villages. The wagon and its attendant tents sat exactly in the same spot outside the first mining village where they had been before. Liam received a few nods from the sharp-eyed sentries posted at the camp's perimeter, and he stopped to speak to the closest one. The woodsman removed his hood to reveal the face of a boy not much older than Liam. He supposed that followers of the Four would already consider him a young adult. "Any trouble?" Liam asked. The boy shook his head. "None of the violent sort. Everyone's being kept warm and fed. Lady Beaumont's as feisty as always." "So you've had trouble of the non-violent sort?" "Not trouble, mind you," the sentry said. "Just seems like nothing's enough for the Countess. Not enough people who can read or write. No one knows the law like she does. She's been looking for a dress, too." "A dress?" Liam frowned. The boy shrugged in response. "Woman things, I reckon. I ain't dumb enough to stick my nose in that." Is he implying that I am? He probably was, though he would have liked to avoid woman things whenever possible. Liam made his way straight to the Countess' makeshift court, taking a deep breath as he steeled himself for whatever awaited him within. The improvised shelter had undergone several improvements, which included an extension where 2 long tables with matching benches had been placed facing the central fire. Olin sat at the center of one table, flanked by a few of his thugs. At the other table were a few of Olin's men, who were enjoying their dinner together. When Countess Beaumont finally noticed Liam's presence, her weary expression blossomed into a brilliant smile. "Liam. Welcome back." "Thank you for your warm welcome, my lady." Liam made a sort of half-bow. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted Claire, who was wearing her barmaid outfit, rushing out of the opposite entrance. "Is everything all right?" he asked. "Things are going about as well as can be expected." The young noblewoman didn't bother masking her sigh. "I'm afraid that nothing I've planned will proceed in reality until I can find some help." "Our work on the border is finished," Liam said, "so we can get going whenever you're ready." Claire reappeared again, bearing a heaping portion of dinner. She beelined straight towards Liam with a big smile of her own, nearly squishing the food between them as she brought herself as close as possible. "I brought you dinner, dear," she breathed. "Ah, I can see that." The Countess cleared her throat, looking none too pleased by the actions of her maid. "Please have a seat, Liam. I'm sure you must be tired after all your hard work this week." "It wasn't that bad for me," Liam replied. "Reed and his men did most of the work." "I see." Lady Beaumont shifted her gaze past Liam's shoulder. "Thank you for your service, Mr. Reed. You and your men will receive fair compensation as soon as we exchange our goods in the city." To Liam's right, Reed made an awkward, wordless bow. A snort issued from one of the men at Olin's table. Liam turned to face the 8 Fingers executive. "The city's more your turf," Liam said. "What kind of trouble should we expect?" "Anyone giving us trouble would be out of their fucking minds," Olin said as he leaned in on his elbow. "That being the case, if any trouble happens it'll be from the nobles." "Which nobles?" Liam asked. "All of them," Olin answered with a sneer. "Whether they're entitled little shitlings or Marquis Bloomrush himself, don't be surprised if they come after you for what they think you have." Liam glanced at Countess Beaumont, whose mouth had fallen open at the sheer amount of venom that laced Olin's words. Had something happened to him in the past that warranted his response? It was equally as likely that he simply saw them as an obstacle to power and therefore an enemy that needed to be destroyed. "I get that you're not exactly fond of nobles," Liam said, "but my question was more along the lines of figuring out how much security we need. We're going to be carrying a bunch of valuables and we need to be able to protect Lady Beaumont at all hours. The trip to the city won't be a problem so long as we're recognized as a part of the 8 Fingers," Olin said. "The same applies for most of the city aside from the noble problem I mentioned." "Will bringing enough armsmen deter them?" Liam asked. "That depends on who we're dealing with. Minor nobles would probably swallow their pride and look for someone else to pick on, but high nobles might still raise a stink even if they're faced with a regiment of armsmen. Of course, all bets are off if they're drunk or on some sort of drug. What about House Bloomrush?" "It's best not to fight them," Olin replied. They have enough pride and money to bring every band of sellswords in the region down on your head over an imagined slight. Bribing the right people pretty much always works to smooth things out with them. Nothing that Olin mentioned came as a surprise, which was a relief. Liam's briefing materials mentioned that the territories under House Bloomrush were the worst parts of Re-Estize, so he half expected open turf wars erupting in the streets of Re-Bloomrusher. So, Countess Beaumont said, in the end, how many men does that mean I should bring? Anything out of the ordinary would attract too much attention, Olin said. I think you know what I mean by that. The young noblewoman bit her lip in vexation. Liam's gaze went back and forth between the two. What does that mean? He asked. Nobles have a nose for power, Olin told him. If our countess here shows up with a larger than expected retinue, her peers will look into why that is. Not ideal if you're trying to quietly exchange those materials of yours. He's right, Lady Beaumont said. House Beaumont's rivals will do everything in their power to interfere with my transactions, and everyone else will maneuver to gain various advantages related to our windfall. There's a good chance that we'll be caught in the resulting quagmire. Liam crossed his arms, remaining silent as the issue was discussed. According to Lady Wagner, the optimal solution was to send the materials to the Sorcerer's Kingdom to sell. Alternatively, they could have gone to Ravel, where the Countess was relatively unknown. After that, they could head to Re-Bloomrusher with a much smaller party to find court staff. Everything was part of the test for Countess Beaumont, however, and Liam was instructed to leave all the noble work to her. Early the following morning, they broke camp and made their way back down to Beaumont town. Despite the trip being downhill the entire way, it took several hours longer to arrive at their destination due to all of the taxes that the Countess had collected. The wagons loaded with iron ore trundled through the town gates long after sunset, and they wasted no time going to the docks to load their barge. Liam minimized his presence, seating himself on a crate on the wharf to take in the goings-on around him. The long loading process gave the town far too much time to react to their presence, and a curse sounded from Olin a few hours after their arrival. Claire and Lady Beaumont went to hide on the barge behind the boxes of cargo as a group of men bearing lamps and torches led a small procession to the waterfront. A tall blonde man in faded silk stepped forward to address them. You there? The man gestured at Olin. What are you doing at this late hour? An early hour for us, my lord, the barge's captain stepped in to answer. We'll be casting off with our cargo come dawn. The man ran a critical eye over the length of the barge, then turned his attention to the men loitering on the wharf. These men are strange to me. I don't recall any of them being a part of your crew. They came in with us. Didn't my lord see? I didn't, the lord replied. What business brings them to Beaumont? Several of Olin's men joined their boss upon hearing the pointed questioning. Some crossed their arms imposingly while others rested their palms on their sidearms. In response, the Lord's attendants stepped forward to make a threatening display of their own. Is this seriously happening? Liam suppressed a sigh. The scene reminded him of so many standoffs between rival houses in Hobans. The difference was that there didn't seem to be even a fraction of the discipline of Roblay's household retinues instilled in the men posturing before him. He looked over at the barge to confirm Lady Beaumont's position, thinking his moves through in the event that a fight broke out. Wait, my lord. The captain waved his arms in a panic. These are Louis men. You know, big, ugly Louis. We don't want no quarrel with him, yeah? The mention of the burly bandit's name gave the nobleman and his companions pause. Olin didn't look like he appreciated being cast as Louis' crony. Several tense seconds passed before the lord clicked his tongue and turned back the way he came. His men were quick to follow suit. Within minutes, the sound of the river and men loading the remaining cargo was all that could be heard in the darkness of the night. Liam went over to where Lady Beaumont and Claire were hiding to see how they were doing. The young noblewoman reached out to cling to him the moment he came close. Are you all right, my lady? Liam asked. The Countess nodded before peering over the crates of ore stacked beside her. A word from you might have been useful, Olin's voice came from behind Liam. It wouldn't have been useful at all, Countess Beaumont replied in a low voice. If those useless lumps knew that I was here, they would have insisted on escorting me to the city. Olin snorted. Liam silently agreed with the man's derisive assessment. Bluster and numbers could be leveraged effectively, but that sort of help was the last thing the Countess was looking for. If they have that much time and energy to spare, Liam said, they should be fixing up their fiefs like you are. I don't disagree, Lady Beaumont replied, but they certainly don't see things that way. Honestly, I have no idea what's going on inside their heads. Aren't you their liege? Liam asked, why not just order them to get to work? Only 2 of them are my vassals, Baron Hender, the one who was doing all the talking just now, and Baron Lyons. Baron Lyons is only 5 and he's barely started on his letters and numbers, never mind everything else. And Baron Hender, when I reminded him of his duties, he looked at me as if I had gone insane. I'd have stripped him of his title right then and there, but I didn't have the means to at the time, and I certainly don't have any time to waste on him now. Are the other nobles like that, as well? I only know about the ones that I've been in contact with in the city, Lady Beaumont replied. To be honest, it's quite difficult to tell how anyone is doing without a small army of informants at one's service. The scions of any house prestigious enough to have a manor in the city know how to keep up appearances. More so than their immediate situation, I'm worried about their pedigree. Roughly a quarter of them are children who understandably aren't capable of leading their households. Most of the rest are spares who unexpectedly inherited after the Battle of Katsa Plains. Many of them were brought up with the expectation that they wouldn't inherit or secure valuable marriage, meaning there's been minimal investment in their upbringing. And you saw fit to exploit that, Olin noted. Obviously, the Countess tilted her head curiously. Why wouldn't I? What do you mean by that? Liam asked. The barge shuddered as it was pushed off of its moorings into the fog-shrouded river. Now that they were safely away, Lady Beaumont visibly relaxed and set about making herself more comfortable. It isn't as if I was hatching any dastardly plots, she said. I was simply leveraging my advantages in an attempt to improve House Beaumont's standing. Little did I know that my house was in such a dire state. Her voice turned bitter at the last, and she seemed intent on taking out her frustrations by forcefully arranging her baggage in a variety of potentially comfortable configurations on the deck. After failing to find anything that pleased her, the Countess made a beckoning gesture to Reed. Mr. Reed, could you and your men rearrange this cargo for me? The woodsman scanned the rows of wooden crates filled with iron ore before sending a confused look in their direction. Rearrange it, my lady? How? Oh, to take advantage of that wonderful magic item of Liam's. Ah. I'll see what we can do, my lady. Reed went and gathered a handful of men. A few moments later, the captain of the barge started shouting at them. Are you trying to drown us all, you crazy bastards? Huh? What do you mean? You can't just move all the cargo to one side like that. Look at how tilted we are. Oh. The men hastily moved some of the ore crates back to the other side of the ship, but they didn't stop trying to figure out how to fulfill Lady Beaumont's request. The captain released an exasperated sigh as he watched them. Just what in the name of the four are you idiots up to? He asked. We're trying to make rooms, Reed answered absently. Using the boxes as walls. Rooms? Yeah, the woodsman nodded. Rooms. You see, our friend over there has this magic item that'll turn things as warm as a summer day. The catch is that you gotta hold onto it or it'll all blow away. So that's why you're trying to make these rooms. Exactly, Reed grinned. The captain nodded absently as he visibly processed the woodsman's words. Liam compared Reed's pitch to the one given by the mages from the Faculty of Alchemy. The questionable accuracy of his explanation aside, Reed was far better at getting his point across. But you said this is magic, the captain said. Is your friend a witch? Reed sent a look over at Liam, who shook his head in response. I don't think so, Reed said. The magic's from an item. Liam produced the item from his pack and held it up in clear view. It looks like a barrel hoop, the captain said. It actually is, Liam told him. Our barrel hoops don't do the thing, he said. It's a magic barrel hoop, Reed said as he threw an arm over the captain's shoulder. Just like the ones they put in all those fancy hotels in the capital. Wouldn't you like to enjoy that instead of some greasy noble with 4 chins? Me? You think we'd leave you out in the cold and wet? The woodsman put on a hurt look. You'll have your own cabin as well. A captain's cabin? I don't know. The captain's twitching grin did little to back up his hesitant reply. Liam looked down at the magic item in his hand. It was quickly proving to be the best bargaining chip that he had. Liam, I don't know any greasy nobles with 4 chins. Huh? I don't. Liam did his best to keep his face from screwing up in confusion at Lady Beaumont's sudden outburst. What was she getting at? Maybe it was a fat merchant, Claire offered. They just ride their wagons from town to town and make money, yeah? Some of 'em dress up all fancy and stay at the nicest places with the richest food, so he might have mistook one for a noble. Why they were discussing Reed's made-up scenario was beyond him. The guy had never been to the capital, so, logically, he had never seen a greasy noble with 4 chins at some fancy hotel there. Don't you have a mountain work to do, my lady? Liam asked. I don't think we should be wasting time on idle gossip. I've taken care of everything that I can, Lady Beaumont answered. The rest will have to wait until we settle our business in the city. He peeked through a crack in the tarp shielding the countess' quarters from the outdoors, frowning up at the weather that they had been sailing into for the past 4 days. Winter had fully set in over Reestize, bestowing its blessing of misery upon the hapless humans below. Little could be heard over the sheets of rain cutting into the river and even less could be seen, but, according to the captain, they would arrive at their destination early that evening. Are you going to be able to get your cargo over the pass with all this rain, Lady Beaumont? Liam asked. Caravaneers don't like traveling in conditions like this. I can't imagine that I couldn't, the young noblewoman replied. The harvest is well over in the uplands, so there should be plenty of wagons for hire. We'll have just to wait for a break in the weather to make the final leg of our journey. House Beaumont's records indicate that this is what we've always done. Liam hoped she was right. If he got stuck in some seedy town in the Azalisia marches all winter, he would be catching up on schoolwork for the next year. If you have some free time now, Liam said, then why not teach Claire how to read and write? It'd be weird to have a maid who doesn't know how. I already know how to read and write. Claire protested. Not to the standard expected of a household retinue, Liam said. The maid pouted, crossing her arms under her breasts. Most people in Reestize were much like her when it came to literacy. They knew their letters and numbers, how to write their names, and recognized a set of words important to everyday life. It was pretty much the bare minimum required to avoid getting cheated by other people so long as records were kept simple. Anything more was considered a luxury. Claire rose to her feet, a smile creeping onto her face. Liam, she called out to him sweetly, you know how to read, right? I'd just love it if you could. Countess Beaumont reached out and yanked the maid back down onto her cushion. I'll teach her, she said. Liam, could you please give us some time alone? He wasted no time making his exit, pulling the hood of his mantle over his head as he stepped out into the rain. A crewman keeping watch over the river nodded silently to him as he made his way over. How long to High Harbor? Liam asked. Not long, the man answered. 3-4 hours at most. I've never been there before, Liam said. What's it like? Like any other port on the river, the man shrugged. The people are a different story, though. They act all snooty 'cause they're the closest town to the city on this side of the pass. What about the pass? Is it hard to cross? The sailor snorted. It's barely a pass. Water flows one way or the other from there and there's nothing else special about it. I see. Liam's maps were meant for merchants, so he figured that he was missing something. Those types of maps weren't very detailed, after all. Apparently, there wasn't much detail to add in the first place. Say, that magic item you got, the one that warms up the air. Was it hard to get? Not really, Liam replied. A bunch were being sold at a shop in my village. Your village has a magic item shop? It's more like. He frowned as he tried to think of a way to describe how buying stuff in Warden's Vale worked. Never mind not usually having magic item shops, most villages didn't have shops at all. When it came to towns and cities, a shop was usually the storefront of a workshop that had a sampling of goods on display. Buying anything more complicated than nails, stockings, or sausages involved the customer making a custom order. In Warden's Vale, every artisan was an employee of one of House Suradnik's chartered companies. Those companies, in turn, had outlets in the village which were constantly stocked with goods that people could purchase right away. Adjustments to things like clothing were done upon purchase, like? Never mind, Liam said. They just happened to be on sale while I was around. Why do you ask? They are mighty handy, so I was thinking I'd like one of my own. Are they expensive? The one we're using right now was going for 2 gold trade coins. 2. Even city folk can't afford that. It's not as expensive as it seems, Liam said. Just think of all the money people spend on firewood to stay warm every year. The magic item basically pays for itself after a few winters. Doesn't it run out? Not that I know of. Despite the clear advantages of the magic item, the sailor still bore a conflicted expression while he digested what Liam had shared with him. If someone goes and steals it, the man asked, will it curse the thief? Make their hand shrivel up and fall off or something? Liam furrowed his brow. No? Then it ain't worth it. Some official or thug will make off with the thing before it pays itself off. He supposed that was the long and short of it. His teachers in Rantle and the artificers in Warden's Vale always talked up the benefits of magic items whenever they became the topic of discussion, but the reality was that magic items were valuable and valuables got stolen. Policing had to be good enough that people didn't have to worry about their stuff being stolen, and Re-Estize was far from that sort of place. Not even nobles were safe. High-class establishments could get away with using magic items because they had powerful patrons who ensured that whatever amounted to local security forces took good care of them. Liam left the sailor to his conclusion, wandering towards the bow where Reed and several of his men stood with their backs against a wall of crates. There wasn't enough room in the makeshift shelters that had been cobbled together to take advantage of the heating hoop, so most of the men took turns hiding from the rain. How long till you get back inside? Liam asked as he approached them. We just came out, Reed said. Honestly, it's not so bad out here. Yeah? The woodsman nodded. Yeah. We figured out a neat little trick. So long as we keep our mantles closed and our hoods up, we basically make little tents that your magic item can heat up the inside of. Now that no one's had a bath for half a week, it's probably nicer out here like this than in the cabins. That's a good point, Liam said. Liam's brooch had an endure elements effect, so he didn't think much about how uncomfortable the weather was. Reed and his men, on the other hand, had every incentive to experiment with the effects of the heating hoop, and the trip gave them plenty of time to do so. He wondered how much he was missing out on by relying on magic items all the time. The crew says we're almost at High Harbor, Liam said. Think we'll have any trouble there? Aside from restless escorts picking stupid fights, no. That'll get worse the longer this rain holds us up. I thought the Eight Fingers escorted the caravans around here. Things get mixed up a bit past High Harbor. Rebloom Russia always has 2 or 3 mercenary companies hanging around, and they're always sniffing around for odd jobs. Oh, you should keep Lady Beaumont out of sight just in case. Town's bound to be crowded, and every girl starts looking like a tart when that happens. I guess we won't be able to find an inn, Liam sighed. It's been rainin' for days, so I doubt it. Lucky we already got our setup figured out, eh? Will it be safe outside? With as many eyes as we have, safe enough. This ain't Lady Beaumont's land, Though, so I'm more worried about our supplies running out. It can't rain for that long, can it? They had packed enough food to last the entire trip to the city, but that only assumed minor delays. With the Countess' financial situation as it was, Liam was providing all of the coin and he wasn't confident that his purse would survive feeding her entire retinue as it was. The rain was coming down even harder when they arrived at High Harbour. An empty berth awaited them, populated by a handful of figures undaunted by the inclement weather. Liam's gaze went through the men hawking covered baskets of food and drink to settle on a thoroughly drenched boy about the same age as himself. "Hey mister," the boy said, "do you need wagons for your cargo?" His question wasn't directed at Liam but at Reed, who stood at the center of attention of his men. The woodsman looked a bit taken aback at being seen as the one in charge. "That's, how many wagons do ya have, kid?" "As many as you need," the boy replied. "I guess he's just like I was." Facet Town wasn't a river port, but it still had plenty of traffic thanks to the Royal Highway. Arranging transport for people going in and out of the duchy was one of the many odd jobs that kids like himself could try their hand at. The boy on the pier likely wasn't an employee of any particular company of caravaneers. Instead, he worked to match the needs of incoming freight with his knowledge of local caravan operators and introduced his mark to the right people for a fee. The fact that he didn't have any competition suggested that he also had connections to the local gang, or was just a part of it, which would get rid of any other kids who tried moving in on the boy's turf for a cut of his earnings. "What's the rate?" Reed asked. 2 silver per wagon per day, the boy answered. "That's absurd." Countess Beaumont's head popped out from her chambers, bearing an incredulous expression. "So much for keeping her hidden." "Who are you?" the boy asked. Reed gave the boy a swat. "That's none of your business," the woodsman growled. "Your quoted rates are half again as expensive as they were last year," Lady Beaumont said. "There should be a limit to your rampant profiteering, young man." "I ain't professor doin' that," the boy protested. "Haven't you heard? There's been a bad harvest up north." "What? Explain yourself." In response to the Countess' demand, the boy held out his palm. Liam's lip twitched as the young noblewoman begrudgingly instructed Claire to hand the boy 2 copper coins. "The winter rains came early, milady," the boy said as he pocketed his gains. "Everything from re-bloom Russia on north got soaked before the harvest. The nobles have shut their granaries and the price of bread keeps going up." Everyone's expression immediately turned grim. The boy's words spelt nothing less than disaster. The quality of the harvest would be poorer than usual and the wet crops would be far more labor-intensive to harvest for the already labor-strapped country. Much of what they managed to store would be lost to mold and rot. In other words, famine was all but guaranteed for the kingdom of Riestize before the end of winter. "I see," Lady Beaumont said quietly. "Mr. Reed, please go ahead and make our transport arrangements." "Yes, my lady." Liam followed the young noblewoman back into her cabin. She sank into her seat in silence, a furrow marring her unblemished brow. "How much does this change for us, my lady?" Liam asked. "I'm still trying to envision the full extent of the damage," the Countess answered. "If the price of hiring a wagon has already gone up by this degree, then the harvest in the north must be especially bad. Visiting re-bloom Russia may be far more dangerous than we expected." "Why? Why?" Lady Beaumont's eyelashes fluttered in confusion. "You heard that, boy, yes. The nobles have shut their granaries. That means they're anticipating a famine and prioritizing the survival of their fiefs. While this is objectively the correct course of action, it means that the city folk will be subsisting on rats and tree bark before long." "What about us?" Claire asked. "I don't fancy munching on pine needles all winter myself." "It's difficult to say," the Countess bit her lip. "We have no grain harvest to withhold in the first place, but we've always supplemented our food supplies through foraging and hunting. Since Liam helped us thin out the wilderness threats along our border, organizing hunting parties should further improve our situation. That will only go so far, however. Imported food will still make up about half of what we need to survive. Beaumont County was similar to Wardensvale in the sense that they were heavily forested territories, but Beaumont County had way more people. He sometimes overheard people in E. Rantle offer scathing commentary about Lady Zaradnik's rule and how she mismanaged her fief by not bringing in as many people as possible to develop the land, but the disaster looming over Rheastize was the unspoken counter-argument. According to Lady Zaradnik, Wardensvale had never known famine and she intended to keep it that way. By contrast, the Duchy of E. Rantle and Rheastize as a whole teetered back and forth between plenty and scarcity, which undermined progress and allowed behaviors induced by instability and lawlessness to entrench themselves in society. Of course, the Sorceress Kingdom didn't have the same problems that Rheastize did. Lawlessness was not an issue and magic could be used to create ideal conditions for agrarian industry. To many, the fact that Lady Zaradnik stood firm on her house's past development policies only served as proof of her incompetence. Overall, she wasn't very well regarded in E. Rantle, considered little better than the violent, savage tribes that populated the wilderness along her border. But is living like this any better? Liam peered through the pouring rain at the waterlogged streets of High Harbour. Like any town, the vast majority of its residents formed the dregs of society, those consigned to vagrancy because they had no land or business to inherit. Only a handful that came to the towns and cities found any measure of success. Those who failed weren't wanted in the first place and conveniently forgotten. Magic and land were limited, so Liam could only assume that the Sorceress Kingdom would eventually end up the same way if it continued growing the way it was. "My lady," Reed's voice leaked through from outside with the rain, "we are done arranging for transport." "Thank you, Mr. Reed," Lady Beaumont said. "Were you able to hire a carriage, as well?" "I wasn't sure whether we needed one," Reed replied. "It's bound to be an uncomfortable ride." "You are right," the young noblewoman nodded. "It would be better for us to travel as we have. We can hire a carriage in the city." "Very good, my lady. I'll let you know when your wagon's ready." "Have you seen Olin?" Liam asked. "He slinked off into the city with his men while I was dealing with that kid," Reed said. "Probably up to the usual." "All right." The barge shifted slightly as Reed's men began to offload cargo. Claire and the Countess moved to put their things away before their shelter was dismantled around them. "Liam," the young noblewoman asked, "what did Mr. Reed mean by the usual?" "That depends on the situation," Liam answered. "In this case, he's gone to refill his purse by collecting syndicate dues from the local gang and using their base to house and feed his men. If he finds any promising people, he'll recruit them for his division." "Some of that sounds like what nobles do," Lady Beaumont said. "Yes and no," Liam told her. "All organizations need resources and people, and the rules of a gang are a lot different from the laws of a fief. I guess the Eight Fingers are more like an evil thieves' guild that got huge than they are like a noble house. Is there such a thing as a good thieves' guild?" "Actually, yes," Liam said. "There are a bunch of them who serve Queen Auriculus by regulating the Draconic Kingdom's underworld. You don't have to worry about Olin and his goons being so nice, though." "Your knowledge of this sort of thing is quite extensive," Lady Beaumont said. "I grew up in a town like this one," Liam said. "It wasn't on a river, but it was on the Royal Highway. The Count who ruled there was a real crook. I guess he was a lot like what people say Marquis Bloomrush is like. His fief and subjects were just a way to gain more land, power, and influence, and he didn't care how it happened." "What was the name of this Count?" "Facet." Lady Beaumont frowned slightly upon hearing the name. "If I recall correctly, Facet County is on the western border of the Duchy of E. Rantle." "It was," Liam told her. "It isn't anymore." What happened?" "Count Facet was executed not long after E. Rantle was annexed," Liam said. "His kids proved to be no different from him, so House Facet was purged and Facet Town was destroyed." The young noblewoman paled upon hearing the fate of Liam's hometown and its ruler. "Does that mean Lady Albedo eventually intends to do the same here?" but we've barely been able to do anything and we haven't received any missives regarding our current activities. If you don't mind my asking, Lady Beaumont, Liam said, what had you decide that Lady Albedo is behind what's been happening? As far as his information was concerned, the new faction of nobles in Riestais was supposed to be filled with idiots and incompetents, so wrapped up in themselves that they were far out of touch with reality. It had come as a surprise to him that the Countess operated under the assumption that the Sorceress Kingdom was the true power behind everything right when they first met, but he figured that it was just a lucky guess. Now that she had proven that she was, in reality, not as stupid as the report suggested, he was curious how she had arrived at her conclusion. There was a party hosted in the capital, Lady Beaumont said. I wasn't there myself, but a few of my acquaintances in the capital duchy were more than happy to brag about it. At any rate, it was one of those functions where people go to see and be seen, but it seems that the entire affair was quite unnatural. How so? Liam asked. It lacked the flow and custom that is supposed to come with that kind of event, the Countess answered. The Eight Fingers essentially gathered a large group of disassociated houses and the Prime Minister of a foreign kingdom randomly showed up for no apparent reason. Everything about the party was both strange and unprecedented. What should have happened, then? Well, if one were to break the party up into its basic components, it's clear that the Eight Fingers organized what they believed such a function should be. But it was all wrong. First of all, the Prime Minister of another country shouldn't be lowering herself to appear before a hodgepodge collection of local aristocrats. The difference in rank is far too extreme and nothing good can happen in such an environment. Secondly, the nobles present barely had any connections between one another, if any. Usually, a function like that is hosted by a single faction and any outsiders invited have been carefully selected for specific purposes. Instead, the party in the capital was factionless, with the apparent purpose of inducing its guests to form new connections with one another. The problem is that it doesn't work that way. Relationships between aristocratic houses are established for practical purposes, not because we happen to breathe the same air for a few hours. Liam nodded at her explanation. That made sense. Not long ago, he might have thought like whoever organized the party in the capital, but he had quickly learned the realities of high society since being rescued from Facet Town. While they seemed powerful and wealthy to most, nobles still had limited resources, military power, and children to marry off. A competent noble used what they had at their disposal to ensure the stability and prosperity of their fiefs by forging strong alliances. A noble who was everyone's friend was little more than a fool. Then what do you think the party was for? It's clear that Her Excellency the Prime Minister had ulterior motives. The party was likely a front for backroom dealings with the Sorceress Kingdom. I can only wonder what sort of deals the nobles present secured. If that was the case, it hadn't been included in his mission briefing. The Ministry of Transportation expected Liam's assignment to gather intelligence representative of Riestais' usual economic activity. No one was supposed to be doing anything out of the ordinary aside from those related to the experiment with Countess Beaumont. My lady, Reed's voice sounded from outside again, we set up your wagon and the guys want to move the rest of the cargo. Come, Claire, Lady Beaumont said, let's get our things moved over. The two girls donned their mantles and rushed over to the covered wagon at the foot of the pier. Liam shared a long look with Reed. Women, the woodsman said. With a shake of his head, Reed and two of his men trudged up the pier with Lady Beaumont's bags in hand. Apparently, getting their things moved over meant having the men do all the heavy lifting. They made camp outside of the town's walls and the rain ceased at some point during the night. The caravaneers declared that they would depart that same day and their wagons were already rolling up the mist-shrouded path up the pass before dawn. Olin caught up to them before midday. The Eight Fingers executive marched his men right past the Countess' wagons to take the lead. It looked like he had picked up a few more men and a lot more confidence. Liam went to join him as they approached the top of the admittedly flat-looking pass. Looks like it'll be your time to shine soon, Liam said. The man responded with a non-committal grunt. Liam eyed the windswept brush that covered the highland vista on either side of the road. Did you learn anything about what's happening in the city? No, Olin replied. Minutes turned into hours as they walked alongside one another in silence, leaving Liam with plenty of time to dwell on his experiences as of late. No matter how he thought about it, the discrepancy between his reports about the so-called third faction and his time with one of its members thus far bothered him. Hey, Olin, he said. Are those nobles in the new faction as dumb as they say? Olin replied with a derisive snort. Don't let that little strumpet fool you, he said. They are probably dumber than you've heard. Lady Beaumont mentioned the party in the capital, Liam said. She saw through a lot of it. Even if she did, Olin said dismissively, the others didn't. You should have seen it yourself. They all thought they deserved to be there, that their mere existence had value. That's technically true, Liam noted. Even if they've recently inherited, a lord still represents the interests of their fief. That's not what I meant, Olin spat. Like I said, you should have seen it yourself. The lot of them are self-important fools. They even thought that Lady Albedo came to them because they were worth more than the High Lords of the realm. Oh, Liam said. That is pretty dumb. Is it the same with the group in Rebloom Russia? That sounds pretty annoying to deal with. You'll see for yourself, Olin said. Hopefully, you can convince Lady Albedo to let us get rid of at least half of them. Olin. On the road ahead, one of Olin's men cantered his horse towards them. Liam and Olin looked up at the rider expectantly as he reined in his horse before them. Well, Olin said, spit it out. It's Rebloom Russia, the man said as he pointed a gloved hand beyond the top of the pass. The whole damn city's on fire.